The Dionysian Mysteries. The bloody ritual that still lives today. In the dead of night, in the forgotten hills of ancient Greece, they gathered under the cover of moonlight. Men and women, cloaked in wild leaves and animal skins, danced with bare feet, bleeding on rocky soil. They wore the faces of beasts, masks carved into goat demons and open-mouthed satyrs, while the sound of drums thundered through the trees like the heartbeat of the world itself. Wine poured like blood. And then, when the frenzy reached its peak, they tore a living creature limb from limb with their bare hands, and ate it raw. This was no act of savagery. It was devotion. Welcome to the Dionysian Mysteries, an ancient ritual so disturbing, so euphoric, so mind-shattering, that it was banned, buried, and almost forgotten. And yet, it still lives. Not in temples, but in festivals, clubs, theaters, and inside your own restless mind. This ritual, believed to awaken the god within, was not meant to comfort. It was meant to annihilate your identity, so something greater could take its place. But to understand this madness, we must first understand the god it served, Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, fertility, theater, and insanity. The son of Zeus and a mortal woman named Semele. He was born once from her womb, and again from Zeus's thigh, after his mother was incinerated by the full power of godhood. Dionysus is the twice-born god, a symbol of death and rebirth, of divine possession, of losing yourself to become more than yourself. He was not a god of statues and cities. He lived in the wild, in forests and caves of the human mind. And his worshippers, the Maenads, the Bacchantes, the mad women, did not pray to him quietly. They screamed, they danced, they surrendered. But why? Historical context. Subversive worship in a rational world, in the rational world of ancient Greece, where order, law, and clarity reigned under gods like Zeus and Apollo. There existed an underground current, a secret and dangerous current. That current was Dionysus, god of the vine, of theater, of madness, of death and rebirth. The Dionysian Mysteries weren't like the Olympian temples or civic festivals. These were initiation rites cloaked in secrecy, performed not in marble temples, but in wild forests and hidden mountains, far from the gaze of the city. Participants weren't just believers. They were initiates into a forbidden current of divine ecstasy, primal violence, and spiritual transformation. Dionysus was not a safe god. He was born twice, first of the mortal Semele and Zeus, and then reborn from Zeus's thigh after Semele was incinerated. His birth alone was a tale of destruction and recreation, the very pattern of the ritual itself. Because Dionysus offered something no other god could: transformation. Not through obedience, not through purity, but through chaos, through madness, through the ecstatic destruction of everything you thought you were. Those who joined the Dionysian cults became part of secret societies called the Theasoi. They were not priests, they were initiates, outsiders, women, slaves, the marginalized and the broken. The very people who had no voice in Greek society became the living voice of Dionysus. And when the call came, they left their homes and disappeared into the wild. It always began with a journey, literal and symbolic. Leaving the city behind meant leaving behind the self. They climbed mountains, crossed rivers, entered the dark woods not as citizens, but as vessels. The further they walked, the deeper they descended. Not into hell, but into the unconscious. Then came the mask. To put on the mask was not to hide. It was to reveal. Behind the eyes of a satyr, or Dionysus himself, the worshipper vanished. In their place stood something raw, ancient, and holy. The mask gave permission to let go, to scream, to cry, to laugh like a lunatic. Because in this space, there were no roles, no shame, no ego. Music began. The drums, the pipes, the chants. The wine flowed, sometimes drugged, sometimes sacred, always intoxicating. Then came the dance. This was no graceful ballet. It was wild, erratic, primal. Bodies shook, hair flailed, voices howled, and something began to change. Movements lost rhythm, eyes glazed, conscious thought dissolved. It was what the Greeks called enthusiasmos, to be filled with the god. They were no longer dancers, they were Dionysus. And then, at the climax of this divine possession, came the blood. An animal was brought forth, often a goat or deer, not as a victim, but as a symbol, as the god himself. In the height of madness, the worshippers descended. They tore the creature apart with their hands, sparagmos, limbs ripped, blood sprayed, flesh devoured raw, homophagia, not as a feast, but as communion. They were not killing an animal, they were devouring the divine, taking Dionysus into themselves, becoming one. This ritual, unthinkable to modern minds, was not seen as evil. It was sacred. It was necessary. Because in that moment of blood and ecstasy, death and life collided. The individual self died, and something vast, timeless, and eternal was born. But why this madness? Why this gore? Because what we repress doesn't disappear. It festers. Dionysus offered a sacred release valve for the pressure of civilization. In a society obsessed with logic, rules, order, hierarchy, Dionysus was the divine eruption. The allowed insanity that kept the world sane. Ritual steps from mask to madness to communion. The Dionysian Mysteries followed a powerful structure, not a formal script, but a visceral flow. A. The call to the wild initiates were summoned to leave the city and enter the wilderness, both literal and metaphorical. This was a departure from ego, from order, from reason. B. Masking and identity dissolution. They donned masks of Dionysus, satyrs, maenads, and beasts. This was no performance. To wear the mask was to become possessed, to lose individuality. In Greek theater, Dionysus was present in the mask itself. Behind each mask, something ancient and primal awakened. Participants howled, danced, screamed, and spoke in tongues, abandoning social identity. C. The madness of ecstasy through wine, repetitive drumming, frenzied dance, and sometimes sexual rites initiates entered a state of mania, divine madness. This was not delusion. It was a sacred state where the barrier between human and God dissolved. The Greek word enthusiasmos, root of enthusiasm, means to be filled with a god. D. Sparagmos and homophagia. The bloody climax at the height of the ritual, an animal, typically a goat or fawn, symbols of Dionysus, was torn apart by bare hands, sparagmos. The flesh was then eaten raw, homophagia. There are whispers, never fully confirmed, that in early rituals it may not always have been an animal. Human sacrifice, though rare, is not ruled out by scholars. The victim represented Dionysus himself, dying and rising again through the bodies of the faithful. This was no mere bloodletting. It was holy communion, the absorption of the divine into the self. To eat raw flesh was to merge with life in its most untamed, ecstatic, and sacred form. Philosophical and psychological meanings. A. Nietzsche's lens, Dionysus versus Apollo. Nietzsche framed all art and human culture as a balance between the Apollonian, order, clarity, structure, and the Dionysian, chaos, passion, disintegration. He saw the Dionysian Mysteries as the primordial truth of existence, that life is suffering and joy, destruction and creation. To embrace Dionysus was to transcend duality. B. Carl Jung. The shadow unleashed. Jung believed Dionysus was a symbol of the collective shadow, the instincts and desires repressed by civilized man. The rituals were a space to consciously confront chaos, not suppress it. The act of tearing apart the animal represented the confrontation with our own violent, bestial nature. By acting it out ritually, initiates avoided unconsciously acting it out destructively in society. Collective catharsis and archetypal death, like Greek tragedy, the ritual was catharsis, purging pain and passion in a sacred space. This was a psychological death and rebirth. Participants emerged transformed, not healed, but remade, their identity broken open to let something divine in. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche saw this clearly. He called Dionysus the embodiment of the primal truth, that life is not rational, that underneath every law, every city, every polite smile is a churning chaos. And unless we face it, it will consume us. Dionysus was not the enemy of order. He was its balance. Carl Jung took it further. In the god Dionysus he saw the shadow, the repressed instincts and desires we lock away. The ritual of madness was a way to face the monster within and emerge stronger. He believed that if we don't face our shadow consciously, it will take over unconsciously. The Dionysian Mysteries were the original shadow work. But beyond psychology and philosophy, there's more. The esoteric layer. The ritual was an alchemical process. The journey to the wild was nigredo, the blackening. The chaos of dance and madness was albedo, purification. And the communion of blood was rubedo, rebirth. The raw flesh wasn't just meat. It was the philosopher's stone, the transmutation of suffering into transcendence. Even the mask had esoteric significance. It wasn't a prop. It was a portal, a gateway through which the divine could enter. In that sacred performance, the line between actor and god disappeared. And the body, once thought profane, became holy. Esoteric interpretations. Divine possession and alchemical death to the initiated. The Dionysian Mysteries were an alchemical process. 1. Nigredo, blackening, entering the wilderness, shedding ego and logic. 2. Albedo, purification, madness, ecstasy, frenzy. 3. Rubedo, rebirth, the blood ritual, communion with the god, reintegration. Symbolism of the mask. The mask represented the higher self waiting behind identity. You do not wear the mask to conceal. You wear it to become what you truly are when no one is watching. Sparagmos as cosmic disintegration. Tearing apart the god is symbolic of disassembling reality. Dionysus represents nature, body, chaos, and to consume him is to consume life itself, its joy and agony. The esoteric initiate learns that only through chaos can one know the divine. Modern echoes and transformations. A. Raves and psychedelic ceremonies. Today's raves mimic the ancient thiasos, collective ecstasy, trance states, identity dissolution, and rebirth. Psychedelic circles, ayahuasca journeys, and even Burning Man contain echoes of Dionysus, ritualized madness to heal the soul. B. Theater and performance. Dionysus was the patron of theater. The emotional purge of powerful drama, method acting, and role play are all shadows of the ancient mask. See, shadow work and therapy. Modern somatic and trauma therapies now integrate Jungian shadow principles. Techniques like ecstatic dance, primal scream therapy, and psychedelic-assisted healing reclaim the Dionysian path. D. The cult of identity crisis. Today's obsession with finding oneself, destroying ego, facing inner demons. This is pure Dionysus. But without sacred structure, modern seekers often drown in the chaos rather than rise from it. Final thought. Dionysus is not gone. He has just changed clothes. You will find him where reason fails. In addiction, in art, in collapse and ecstasy. He dances in the club, in the forest, in the mind torn apart by trauma, and rebuilt with purpose. To follow Dionysus is to step into fire, knowing you will burn, but also knowing you will rise, twice born. But the Dionysian Mysteries couldn't last. They were too raw, too dangerous. The state feared them. The philosophers condemned them. And eventually the cults were banned, scattered, and demonized. But they didn't die. Because you can't kill a god like Dionysus. You'll find him in the rave, where bodies pulse to deafening bass, and identity dissolves in sweat and chemicals. You'll find him in the psychedelic journey, where ego death births new vision. You'll find him in theater, in ritual, in dance therapy, in shadow work. You'll find him in every corner of our modern world where people seek to escape the prison of self. Because deep down, we still need him. We need to go mad, just a little. To shake, scream, cry, and be reborn. Not as the people we pretend to be, but as something real, something sacred, something free. Dionysus doesn't ask for belief. He asks for surrender. And if you're brave enough to answer, he will take everything from you and give you everything in return. But be warned, once you've danced with the god of madness, nothing is ever the same again. So, would you enter the forest? Would you wear the mask? Would you tear the god apart and eat him? Because if you do, you will never be the same. And that is the point.